Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're plunging into, well, a fascinating world where words aren't just entries in a dictionary. They're living, breathing entities that reflect and, crucially, shape our entire society.
That's absolutely right. They're far from static. Words evolve, they carry entire histories with them, and they're profoundly intertwined with social and historical problems, often in ways we don't even, consciously realize.
And our guide for this deep dive is Raymond Williams. He's a really seminal figure in cultural studies. His unique approach, I think, helps us uncover the hidden power within the language we use every single day. So, our mission today, to unpack Williams's central, really profound argument that the problems of meaning in language are inextricably bound up with social and historical problems.
Exactly. We're going to explore his groundbreaking keywords project and his concept of structures of feeling. These aren't just dry academic terms. They're tools, really. Tools to reveal how language is this dynamic, active force that shapes our collective and, our individual experiences, too.
Right.
And you'll discover that even the most familiar words we toss around casually, actually hold these complex histories and conflicting ideas that are still very much at play today.
Okay, let's unpack this. Let's start with Williams himself, maybe his personal starting point. His journey into this fascinating world of words began with a very personal moment. Picture this. It's 1945.
Right after the war.
Exactly. Raymond Williams, he's back from the Army, returns to Cambridge. He'd only been away for, a few years. But something felt profoundly off. He described this really unsettling sense that they just don't speak the same language.
Yeah, a real disconnect.
And the one difficult word that really preoccupied him, the one that stood out, was culture.
And he noticed how the word culture was, unmistakably shifting right before his eyes. Before the war, he'd mostly encountered it in maybe two main ways. One was almost comical, as a marker of social superiority, the tea shop sense, as he put it, suggesting refinement.
Right, a bit snooty maybe.
A bit. And the other was among his friends, referring more to artistic activity like writing poems or making films, that sort of thing.
But after the war, he saw these two new senses emerging that totally captivated him. First, in literary discussions, culture was starting to indicate some central formation of values.
Something deeper.
And then in more general conversations, it was being used almost like society itself, a particular way of life, like American culture or Japanese culture.
And that was a real aha moment for him. He describes this shock of recognition when he actually went and looked up culture in the Oxford English Dictionary.
Ah, the OED.
The OED. He realized these shifts in meaning he was sensing hadn't just happened overnight. They'd started much earlier, way back in the early 19th century. And those connections he instinctively felt between culture and other big words like class, art, industry, democracy, they suddenly clicked into a larger intellectual and historical shape for him.
Okay, so this is where it gets really interesting and I think profoundly practical. Williams's book, Keywords, it's not a dictionary, right? Not in the usual sense.
Not at all. He was very clear about that. He called it the record of an inquiry into a vocabulary, specifically a shared body of words and meanings in our most general discussions in English of the practices and institutions which we group as culture and society.
So a record of an investigation.
Exactly. He said these words virtually forced themselves on his attention because their problems of meaning were completely inseparable from the very social problems they were used to discuss. So understanding the word became this direct path to understanding and maybe even challenging the conflict itself.
That really highlights the profound, almost hidden power of language, doesn't it?
It does. Williams shows us how controlling the very words used in a debate, what he called lexical aggression, can fundamentally shape, maybe even control, the entire conversation. You think about Malcolm X, for instance. He famously described how he meticulously read the dictionary in prison to become a more effective debater. That was a truly revolutionary moment for him.
Yeah.
Williams held a similar belief, that language isn't merely a reflection of society. Instead, he argued, some important social and historical processes occur within language. It's an active battleground.
So Williams wasn't trying to, fix language or settle arguments with keywords. What was his purpose then? If not to purify or resolve disputes, it feels a bit counterintuitive.
That's a great question, and it's really key to understanding him. His ultimate purpose was to make us conscious and critical of the vocabulary we've inherited. He believed that understanding the complexities of a word like class, for example, it doesn't magically resolve class struggles directly, but it gives us that extra edge of consciousness.
Ah, okay. An edge.
Yeah. It's about seeing language not as some fixed tradition you just learn, but as an active shaping and reshaping happening in real, often conflicting circumstances. It gives you an intellectual advantage, a deeper understanding of the fight.
That's a crucial distinction. So Williams has shown us how deeply personal and social the evolution of just a single word can be. Now, maybe we should zoom out and see how he applied this thinking to fundamental concepts like culture and language itself, revealing them as active practices, not just, reflections.
Exactly. We touched on culture, and Williams meticulously traces its historical development. It started as a noun of process, meaning an action like cultivating crops or later cultivating the mind.
Bridge nurturing something.
Precisely. And then it eventually diverged from the term civilization.
And it's fascinating how that separation happened. You mentioned the Romantic movement. They fiercely attacked civilization as superficial, right? As sort of artificial compared to a more natural state.
Yeah, and that really pushed culture towards being associated with inner or spiritual development, got tied up with religion, art, personal life, often in direct opposition to civilization.
Okay.
And then, as industrial society rapidly developed, with all its intense social conflicts, you get this new battery of forces ranged against both culture and civilization. Think about terms like materialism, commercialism, democracy, socialism. These words became critical lenses for viewing and critiquing the huge societal changes that were happening.
And it wasn't just culture that went through this kind of transformation, was it? Williams also really dug into how we understand language itself. Historically, these ancient ideas of logos saw language as almost mystical, intrinsically linked with reality, like the word was the thing.
Right, kind of unity.
But modern thought created this decisive separation between language and reality.
And what's fascinating there is the medieval concept of the sign-like, a mark or token that mediates between a word and a thing. This concept, surprisingly, got readopted in modern linguistic thought. But here's Williams's radical idea. He argued that language is not a medium in the way paint is a medium for a painter.
Okay, how so?
Instead, he saw it as a constitutive element of material social practice.
Yeah.
It is human sociality itself. In other words, language is like the very fabric of our social lives, not just a tool we pick up and use, but an essential ingredient in how we build and experience society itself.
Wow, so it's not separate.
Not separate.
Uh-huh.
And because of this fundamental shift, this deep split, as he called it, in how we understand language, we ended up with these artificial divisions, like referential versus emotive language or ordinary versus literary language. These categories, Williams argued, actually obscure the inherent active nature of language.
Which naturally leads us to literature as a social and historical category.
Yeah. The modern concept of literature, as we understand it today, didn't really fully emerge until the 19th century. Its roots are in the Latin litera, meaning a letter of the alphabet. And initially, it just referred to reading or learning very broadly.
But then in the 18th century, there was a significant shift from just learning to taste or sensibility.
Right. And that shift became increasingly linked to class. It moved from being about a broader scholarly profession to something tied to a specific class position. So literature became something for the quote-unquote cultivated classes. And what's really important to grasp is how literature became specialized as creative or imaginative work. Initially, this was kind of an affirmative response to the repressive nature of industrial capitalism, asserting human creativity against the mechanical.
Like a pushback.
Exactly. But later, it became more defensive as the full pressures of industrial capitalism continued. It was a way to say, look, our imagination is still free, even if our lives are not.
And this specialization also meant that national literature transformed. It wasn't just a historical record of everything written in a nation anymore.
No, it became a selective tradition. It ratified present values,
Right.
often defining itself by consciously excluding other works. It's a bit like choosing which parts of your family history to tell and which to conveniently leave out to create a particular narrative about who you are now.
That makes sense. Okay, so let's move beyond those fixed categories and explore how Williams helps us understand the dynamic relationships within society. Take ideology, for example.
Right. Simplistic views often reduce ideology to mere reflexes, echoes, phantoms, just false ideas or propaganda.
Yeah, the kind of negative view.
But Williams really emphasizes Marx's more nuanced take, that these are ideological forms in which men become conscious of this conflict and fight it out. This moves us way beyond abstract notions of true or false consciousness. It's about ideas as active sites of struggle, where people are trying to make sense of and even change their lived experience.
Okay, so ideas as battlegrounds.
Pretty much. And if we connect this to the bigger picture, Williams also famously challenged that common Marxist formula of an economic base, rigidly determining a legal, political, and cultural superstructure.
The old base superstructure model.
Yeah, he argued vehemently against seeing these as separable, concrete entities. He insisted we have to study specific and indissoluble real processes where the relationship is one of complex determination. He wasn't saying culture doesn't matter. He was saying it's fundamentally interwoven with everything else.
And this concept of determination is key because it's often misunderstood, isn't it?
Hugely. Williams clarifies it not as some rigid external force or iron laws, but as setting bounds or setting limits. It's not about being pre-programmed, but about the objective conditions and historical context present at any given moment that shape what's possible.
So constraints, but not complete control.
Exactly. As Engels famously put it, we make our history ourselves. This means human agency operates within those limits set by determination. Williams argued that, look, a Marxism without some concept of determination is, in effect, worthless. But he felt many existing concepts of it were radically disabled because they were far too rigid. He was trying to rescue the idea, make it more flexible, more real.
Right, and this also shifts our understanding of art, moving away from a simple reflection theory where art just mirrors reality.
Yeah, he moves us towards mediation, which he sees as an active process of intercession and reconciliation. It's not just a passive reflection. It's a dynamic act of engaging with reality.
So art is doing something, not just showing something.
Precisely. He argued that language and signification are indissoluble elements of the material social process itself. This means culture isn't just some side effect or a superstructure that sits neatly on top of economic life. It's an integral part of the production and reproduction of real life. Language isn't just for description, it's part of the action.
Okay, given everything we've discussed about language shaping reality, this brings us quite naturally to a really crucial concept that takes it even further. Hegemony.
Yes, hegemony. It goes beyond just ideology, because it's not only about explicit beliefs or doctrines, it's the whole lived social process as practically organized by specific and dominant meanings and values.
A whole lived process, that sounds all-encompassing.
It kind of is. What's fascinating here is how hegemony creates this sense of reality that's so deeply embedded it just feels like simple experience and common sense. This makes it incredibly difficult for most people to question because it appears totally natural, just the way things are. It's like the cultural air we breathe.
But Williams stresses that hegemony is never either total or exclusive. That seems important.
Critically important. Alternative and oppositional cultures always exist alongside the dominant one, and the hegemonic process is constantly, actively working to control or transform or even incorporate them. This highlights the ongoing cultural process as a dynamic site of struggle. It's never settled. It's an ongoing negotiation, a push and pull.
Okay, and we can see this playing out in practical ways through what Williams called traditions, institutions, and formations.
Exactly. Think of traditions not as these dusty relics, but as the stories about the past that we choose to keep telling today because they support our current values. Those selective narratives again.
Right.
Institutions are the concrete places like schools or media outlets where these dominant meanings are built into our daily lives and constantly reinforced.
Making them seem normal.
Yeah. And formations are these newer groups or movements that emerge, maybe a social movement forming around a particular issue, actively challenging or trying to reshape these dominant ideas.
Okay, that clarifies how it works on the ground. Now let's get to maybe the most original and perhaps elusive piece of Williams's puzzle, his concept of structures of feeling. You mentioned this unlocks those unarticulated feelings. This is something he invented, or rather gradually, accretively formulated.
Yeah, it's really his signature concept, I think. He called it a cultural hypothesis designed to understand social experiences in solution.
Yeah.
Imagine it like a collective gut feeling or an unspoken mood, maybe a kind of hunch shared by a generation that hasn't quite found the words to express it yet.
So pre-articulation.
Kind of. It manifests, he has said, as an unease, a stress, a displacement, a latency. It's the underlying emotional and intellectual atmosphere of a particular time and place.
And this is where it gets really interesting for art and literature, right?
Absolutely. Williams argued that these structures of feeling represent the true social content in art and literature. You can even find traces of them in what might seem like artistic failures, where authors are visibly struggling to articulate these emergent, not yet fully formed feelings. It's like they're sensing something in the cultural air that they can't quite pin down yet, but they're trying.
Wow.
It's a structured formation, he says, that reveals how a new generation responds in its own ways to the unique world it is inheriting. And this raises a really important question for you listening now.
Yeah.
What unarticulated feelings might be shaping your world right now? What's just beneath the surface of conversation, not quite being said?
That's a powerful way to think about it. Williams's work also deeply emphasizes human creativity and self-creation, which he saw as being right at the center of Marxism, actually.
Definitely. He saw writing not just as some active individual genius operating in isolation, but as a material social art. It's a true continuum, from simply reproducing existing ideas all the way to actively articulating entirely new ones.
And he introduced this idea of the collective subject or trans-individual subject in authorship. What does that mean exactly?
Well, it's not about denying individual authors, but it's about recognizing that shared experiences and creative responses often emerge from active social relationships. Even when people are working on individual projects, it's about this fascinating dance, this reciprocal discovery, as he put it, finding the truly social aspects within the individual and the truly individual aspects within the social context.
Okay, so it's always interconnected.
Always. And finally, Williams makes this really powerful case that literary conventions, the standard ways character, place, or action are presented in a story. They aren't merely aesthetic choices.
They're more than just style.
Much more. He argues they are variable conventions involving radical social assumptions of causation and consequence.
Wow. Okay. Can you give an example?
Well, think about the shift over time in how intimate relationships, or even just the act of work, is described in literature. These descriptions aren't just stylistic flourishes. They reflect changing social attitudes and deeply embedded assumptions that are usually not argued but presented as natural or self-evident.
Things taken for granted.
Exactly. Williams insisted that these notations, these ways of writing, are actually relationships expressed, offered, tested, and amended in a whole social process. They're literally part of how we make sense of and construct our world together.
So we've really gone on a deep dive into Raymond Williams's thinking here. And what you've discovered, I hope, is that words are not just static labels for things. They are dynamic participants in our social and historical processes. His work gives us the tools to sort of peel back the layers of everyday language and see the intricate, often hidden connections between our words, our culture, and our society.
Yeah, absolutely. So what does this all mean for you as you go about your day? Maybe next time you encounter a heated debate online, or even just hear a seemingly simple description of something, consider not just what is being said, but how the very words being used embody generations of historical shifts, class tensions, maybe those unarticulated feelings we talked about.
What forgotten or emerging structures of feeling might be shaping that conversation, even when they're not yet fully expressed? What insights might you gain by looking at the language itself as a site, an active site, of ongoing social and historical struggle? Food for thought.